Hi, so welcome to Section 8. I've called this More Practice with Monopolistic Competition because basically we're going to go through the setup. We're going to start basically with the setup of the monopolistic competition model that we had from last time, and then go through a couple of exercises which will give you a little bit more practice with both the heterogeneous firms and homogeneous firms versions of this model. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first question is, we're going to consider the monopolistic competition model still with homogeneous firms. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at changes in market size. And so what we're going to think of initially is that there's two separate markets. Home and foreign are going to have each their own market, where home is going to have a market size of 9, and then foreign is going to have a market size of 16. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move from autarky to trade integration. And so what trade integration is essentially effectively saying is that if we've had two separate markets now, home and foreign's markets are just going to combine to become one. And so then what we want to ask is what the number of brands that are going to be available to consumers after this trade integration occurs. And here what we're going to assume is that all other fundamentals like marginal costs, fixed costs, and the sensitivity of demand to price are all going to stay constant. So let's just recap the results that we had from last time. What we had last time is we derived the PP curve by setting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost for my monopolistic competitor. And so recall that implied that the price that a monopolistic competitor was going to charge was equal to the marginal cost plus 1 over Bn, where n is the number of firms in our market. Okay, and then we also have the CC curve, which is just saying the average cost of a given firm. And so depending on whether or not firms are homogeneous, we can simplify by setting Q equal to S over N. But if we can't, then the average cost is just CI plus the fixed cost divided by the total number of units of production of my monopolistic competitor. Okay, and so then to solve for the number of firms in our market, this is just all review from last time, we set PI equal to AC, or we set the PP curve equal to the CC curve. And doing so gives us the first equality that C plus 1 over Bn is equal to C plus NF over S. The C's cancel out on both sides, and so rearranging a little bit, you should get that the n star, the number of firms in equilibrium, is equal to the square root of S over BF. Okay, so this is the expression that we're going to use to calculate the number of firms for both countries in autarky. Okay, so using this formula and noting that SH is equal to 9 and SF is equal to 16, then the number of firms in home is just going to be given by plugging in for SH in that formula that we had initially, which just gives us that ultimately NH, or the equilibrium number of firms, is just going to be equal to 3 times the square root of S over BF. We can do the same for the number of firms initially in foreign, and that ultimately is going to give us 4 square root of S over BF. Okay. So, of course, the number of firms is also equal to the number of brands because we've associated just one firm with its own brand, and so we can refer to firms and brands interchangeably. Okay, so now with trade integration, firms are going to have access to the entire market. And so what we're going to consider is that the new market is basically just going to be the sum of the markets in the respective countries. And so S here is going to be equal to 25S now. And so then the number of firms that emerges in the new equilibrium of trade is going to be equal to, basically, if we just add up S plus H SH and S plus F, then what we're left that the new market size is 25S. We just plug that into the same formula, and we get that the new number of firms is equal to 5 times the square root of S over BF. Okay, so from the perspective of each individual country, you can note that the number of firms now in our sort of market integration scenario or trade scenario, as you want to call it, is that the number of brands that are available from each country's perspective is greater, because 5 is greater than both 3 and 4 times the square root of S over BF. However, note that if you add up the number of firms in both home and foreign in Autarky, that's going to give us that we had 7 square root of S over BF firms initially in the total of both countries. From the perspective of one country, it didn't really matter because you couldn't access firms in the other country. But we had more total number of firms initially, summing up across both countries, than we do now in trade. And so from the perspective of each country, we're going to gain, but the overall number of firms is smaller. And so why is the last result occurring? Well, there's now more brands available to each consumer, and so there's therefore more competition. And so each firm has to compensate for the fact that that competition is pulling down its prices by producing a larger quantity in order to reduce average cost. So note that if the left-hand side is that P has to be equal to CI plus 1 over MB, if N is increasing, then now the right-hand side has to decrease as well too, and the way to do that is that firms must increase their quantity produced. And so since each firm produces more in Autarky, it must be that the number of firms has decreased, because note that if the quantity produced is Q equal to S over N, and we have that Q is increasing, then we must have that that N is decreasing less than proportionally to what S is.